This debate gets revealing very quickly, and the double standard being exposed here is hard to ignore. Before we break it all down, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think about this discussion. Tyler Cohen went on CNN and completely exposed the hypocrisy behind Republican arguments on gerrymandering, voting rights, and what MAGA suddenly decides counts as democracy depending on which party benefits. During this debate with former Trump campaign aide Caroline Sunshine, Bryan pointed out the obvious contradiction Republicans never want to admit. When GOP-controlled states like Texas, Florida, or Tennessee aggressively redraw maps to lock Democrats out of representation, conservatives call it states' rights. But the second Democrats try to fight back in places like Virginia, suddenly Republicans start talking about fairness, constitutional concerns, and abuse of power. What made this exchange especially revealing was how quickly Caroline Sunshine abandoned the actual topic anytime Bryan cornered her on the facts. The conversation started with redistricting and voting power, but the moment Bryan explained how Republicans are systematically diluting representation in heavily Democratic and majority black cities like Memphis and Nashville, Caroline immediately pivoted into talking about undocumented immigrants voting, something that has absolutely nothing to do with the issue being discussed and isn't even happening in federal elections. It was a perfect example of how modern MAGA media discourse works. Avoid the substance, throw out a culture war talking point, and hope nobody notices the deflection. And Bryan also made another important point that Republicans hate hearing. Democrats have spent years trying to play by traditional institutional rules, while Republicans increasingly treat politics like raw power warfare. Whether it's gerrymandering, court manipulation, or overturning voter-approved initiatives, the pattern is the same. Republicans only respect Democratic outcomes when they win. The second voters produce a result they don't like, suddenly courts, legislatures, or partisan officials step in to enforce it. That's exactly why this Virginia fight matters far beyond just one state.
Now, what Texas I'm asking Virginia, but I want to know if you think if it was a power
where
play.
Does this go? Because you want to talk about power plays. I would love to know. Hasan Piker on your side of the aisle said today that as a result of this ruling, if a peaceful revolution is not possible, then violent revolution is inevitable. So do you agree with Hasan Piker?
I'm not Hasan Piker. Hasan Piker can...
But do you agree with that?
Hasan Piker can speak for himself.
What does he mean by that?
I don't know. You can ask him. I'm not Hasan Piker. I'm
but
Bryan.
Do you agree?
And now to the latest on the redistricting battle in the U.S. The Virginia State Supreme Court has struck down the Democrats' redistricting plan that voters approved a few weeks ago. The plan could have helped Democrats win as many as 4 more House seats, but the state's high court ruled that the process of creating the referendum violated the state constitution. State Democrats say they intend to appeal the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has given states wide latitude when it comes to redistricting. President Trump took to social media to celebrate the decision, calling it a huge win for the Republican Party and America in Virginia. Meantime, Alabama lawmakers have approved a plan to hold new primaries if the court allowed the state to use different congressional districts in this year's elections. Let's bring in Tyler Cohen, host of the No Lie with Tyler Cohen podcast, and Caroline Sunshine, former communications aide for President Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. Welcome back to both of you. Bryan, let's start with you. You have been on this redistricting train for years, telling Democrats that you should redistrict. A lot of times they wouldn't listen to you. Now it seems like they finally are and realizing the risk of this. What's your reaction to what happened in Virginia and what Democrats should do now?
Look, I think that the reaction to what happened in Virginia is that it is the perfect encapsulation of the asymmetry between the two sides, where we have independent redistricting commissions in all of the Democratic weapons. And, even when you go to the voters, even when 3 million people show up to vote in a referendum that based on some small technicality, all of those voters' voices are going to be silenced. At the same time that we have Republicans in Florida, in Texas, in North Carolina, possibly South Carolina, Tennessee, all who have just decided by fiat that they're going to redraw their states' maps. I mean, basically ushering in elected legislatures, but redrawing the state maps without a single person weighing in on this stuff, basically ushering in Jim Crow 2.0 in the South. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point where we see no black representation in any of these southern states. And so I think it's a wake-up call to Democrats across the country. If you are a Democrat in New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, this is the time to start fighting back and recognize the urgency of this moment right here. Because Republicans don't believe that Democrats have a right to exist as a party. And so if we don't start fighting back and if we don't stop unilaterally disarming, we're basically going to good government ourselves into obscurity.
Caroline, what do you think of this? Is it Jim Crow 2.0?
Well, so you're opposed to this because you think that this dilutes people's political power unfairly? Is that why you're opposed to this?
I think that it dilutes the ability of people in certain jurisdictions to be able to vote for their representatives. Nashville has been cracked into multiple districts. Memphis has been cracked in multiple districts. And so there's no way that those people who live in those jurisdictions can vote for their representatives because the Republicans have purposefully gerrymandered those states to dilute their voting power.
So you're against diluting voting power?
I'm against gerrymandering.
Okay, so do you support then illegal immigrants being allowed to vote in elections?
Illegal immigrants don't vote in federal elections.
Well, illegal immigrants are who Democrats want to vote in federal elections.
But that doesn't make
It doesn't
matter if they want. It doesn't matter what anybody wants.
If you are against diluting political power for anybody, you should not want illegal immigrants to vote in American elections because we can't dilute the political power of American citizens.
But this isn't a discussion about that. And illegal immigrants are not allowed to vote in federal elections. What about this move of what the Supreme Court did and what Republicans are doing right now when it comes to redistricting? A lot of this started with President Trump telling Texas to get him more congressional districts.
Well, I think checks and balances played out here. I mean, the Virginia Supreme Court said this can't happen in 2026, but it could happen in 2028. So I'm not sure what the big deal is here. This went through the democratic process, and the Supreme Court, the judge struck it down saying the language in the referendum was flagrantly misleading. And he's not saying it can't happen. He's just saying it can't happen in 2026 because it's unconstitutional. And he's correct, because that is a flagrant power play by Democrats to try to reshape the midterms in 2026.
So if you think
now,
that's
my question for you
that's a power play,
is what comes next?
Was it a power play when Donald Trump demanded the same thing in Texas? Said that he was entitled to 5 seats in Texas? Was that a power play?
Texas isn't Virginia. The states are sovereign according to the Constitution. The 10th Amendment says federalism. Each state has the right to conduct it differently.
I'm asking you if
it played out how it played out in Texas because Texas isn't Virginia.
I understand that Texas is not Virginia, but I want to know if you think it was a power play.
Where does this go? Because you want to talk about power plays. I would love to know. Hasan Piker on your side of the aisle said today that as a result of this ruling, if a peaceful revolution is not possible, then violent revolution is inevitable. So do you agree with Hasan Piker?
I'm not Hasan Piker. Hasan Piker
do you agree with that?
Hasan Piker can speak for himself.
What does he mean by that?
I don't know. You can ask him. I'm not Hasan Piker. I'm
But
Brian.
do you agree with that? Do you condemn that?
Call Hasan Piker
Where
and
do you
ask.
want to see this go?
What I'm here I don't care what Hasan Piker says. I'm not Hasan Piker.
I don't think Brian's pushing for a violent revolution either.
Are you or no? Just to be clear, because where does this go now that the Supreme Court in Virginia has ruled
Here's where it goes.
It
goes to me calling on every Democratic elected official, either in the legislature or the governor's office, in Democratic states across the country, and demanding that they redraw maps to fight fire with fire and actually counteract what Republicans have done in a raft of different states across the country and what they continue to do in southern states across the country in response to the Voting Rights Act being gutted.
Do you think that there should be a national ban on gerrymandering to try to stop this whole thing around the country?
I'm not opposed to it, but I also believe that the Constitution says, 10th Amendment, what is not outlined here is left to the states. And I think states have a right to decide their own process. And that's what I'm arguing with you is the process played out here in Virginia. It was put on the ballot on a referendum directly with the voters. It barely passed. The language was extremely misleading. There was an appeal. It then went to the state Supreme Court. What's the problem here? Checks and balances played out.
And you
100%. And in fact, when the Democrats put that forward, a national ban on gerrymandering in 2021, the Freedom to Vote Act, every single Democrat voted for it. Every single Republican voted against it.
Do you think the United States Supreme Court, which has supported Texas's right to do this and has supported California's right to do this, will support Virginia's right to do redistricting? You think they might overturn this?
No. I think that the Supreme Court has proven itself to be an arm of the Republican Party, if nothing else. And we have seen numerous instances where, whether it's this U.S. Supreme Court, where you had a bunch of justices beat their chest about the importance of precedent and the Voting Rights Act, which is, that precedent has been reaffirmed over and over and over again for the past 60 years, just like Roe was precedent that was reaffirmed over and over again. The Supreme Court stands for its own adherence to the Republican Party.
You think the Supreme Court might step in?
I don't think they're going to hear this. I don't see why they would. Again, the people of Virginia spoke. And what's interesting is when this referendum was put on the ballot, let's be very clear, it disenfranchised the rights and the voices, if we're talking about who got disenfranchised with the referendum, of rural Virginians. Yeah. This referendum transferred power from majority of the state, which is rural Virginians, and consolidated it among the swamp, which is people who work in D.C. and live in Virginia. But I didn't hear you speaking up then.
And by the way, I would concede that when you have a gerrymandered map, certain people are disenfranchised, which is why this whole thing was sparked off after Republicans first went after Texas. I didn't agree with it when it happened in Texas, but what I don't want to see is unilateral disarmament. I think gerrymandering is a scourge all around. But if you really care about disenfranchisement, then you'll care about it when it happens right off the bat. You'll care about it when it happens in Texas. You'll care about it when all of a sudden Memphis is cracked into multiple districts, Nashville is cracked into multiple districts, and those people have no voting power because that's 100% Republican.
And that is true in California now, that Republicans are being disenfranchised by Prop 50.
But the difference
is the districts are not. It's not fair to Republican voters. And the idea of like a 52-0 map here is not fair, just like it's not fair what we're seeing in Tennessee and other places where there's going to be no Democratic representation. That's bad for democracy.
Correct. It's terrible for democracy. The difference is there's only one party that actually supports a nationwide ban on gerrymandering, and that's the Democrats.
Violent revolution, to be clear, is also bad for democracy.
And neither Brian nor myself are endorsing violent revolution, just to be clear. Always against political violence. I've said that repeatedly. Quickly, here in Los Angeles, there's a very interesting race happening right now for mayor. Karen Bass, the incumbent, who has been embattled and does not have very high approval ratings right now, is being challenged by Spencer Pratt, a reality star known for The Hills, who's a Republican, who gets a lot of attention on social media, had a debate this week, got a lot of attention for it. What do you make of what Spencer is doing right now? He's running ads that he's getting a lot of attention for. Certainly a lot of Republicans around the country who don't live in Los Angeles and can't vote for him are endorsing him. What do you think of his chances to actually win in a deeply blue city?
I think Spencer Pratt could be the next mayor of Los Angeles, and I'll tell you why. The last time a reality television star who was politically incorrect ran for office, he ended up all the way at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And Spencer Pratt is reminding me of the saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. He has all the makings. I don't even have to use the Donald Trump example. He has the charisma of Mamdani, AOC, Trump. He has that outsider, anti-establishment energy, and he is good at harnessing attention. He is running, tactically speaking, a very nimble, agile, smart campaign. I can tell that campaign is not being governed by committee. My guess is it's a very small team of 5 to 6 people who, just like Trump in 2016, are able to move a lot faster than bloated political consultant type campaigns. And Spencer, people are saying they don't like his politically correct comments. So in the debate the other night, people said he was offensive maybe when he was suggesting that Nithya Raman go ask people who are homeless under the freeway for treatment. They were going to get stabbed in the neck, and people were really offended by that. Well, guess what? In Venice, California today, we had a man get his arm sliced off with a samurai sword. So Spencer Pratt, it looks like, is way more in touch with reality than the rest of the candidates on that stage.
Quickly, Brian, thoughts on Spencer?
What could possibly go wrong with a longtime reality star who speaks bluntly, knows how to game the media, and decides that he wants to be a politician? Look, I think that would
actually... What do you have to lose, Brian?
I think that would actually carry more weight if Donald Trump's approval rating wasn't what it is right now, and if he wasn't, basically exposed as a con artist for promising to be this populist champion, and instead, prices are higher for everybody, healthcare's cut, food assistance has been cut, and we're spending God knows how many billions of dollars per day on a war in the Middle East that he promised would never happen.
Well, in the next few weeks, we will be talking to all the leading candidates for LA mayor, including Spencer Pratt, here on The Story Is. But for now, thanks to Caroline and Brian, we could keep going all night, but at some point we got to stop. Thank you guys both for being here.
What really stood out in this debate was not just the hypocrisy from Caroline Sunshine, but how casually Republicans now defend behavior that would have caused national outrage if Democrats were the ones doing it. Tyler Cohen was absolutely correct to point out that this entire conversation about power plays only seems to apply when Democrats respond to Republican extremism. That's the part MAGA commentators never want to acknowledge. Republicans spent the last decade aggressively redrawing congressional maps across states like Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee, specifically to maximize Republican power while minimizing Democratic representation, especially in urban and majority black communities. And they did it openly. They bragged about it. Donald Trump himself reportedly pressured Texas Republicans to squeeze even more congressional seats out of their maps because he understood that modern Republican politics increasingly depends on structural advantages rather than majority support. But the second Democrats even discuss countering that strategy, suddenly conservatives act horrified about partisanship and fairness. It's the same pattern over and over again. Republicans break norms, demolish guardrails, weaponize institutions for partisan gain, and then demand Democrats continue behaving like it's still 1995 and everyone is operating in good faith. Brian was right when he said Democrats have spent too long good governing themselves into obscurity. Because at some point, if one side is fighting a street fight while the other side insists on following parliamentary etiquette, the outcome becomes predictable. And Caroline Sunshine's performance was honestly a perfect representation of what modern conservative media discourse has become. Notice how every time Brian locked her into the actual topic, gerrymandering and voter disenfranchisement, she immediately pivoted to unrelated MAGA talking points. Suddenly she's talking about undocumented immigrants voting, then she pivots to Hasan Piker and violent revolution. None of that had anything to do with the issue being discussed. That's not an accident. That's the strategy. Deflect, redirect, create outrage, change the subject. Because the actual facts around Republican gerrymandering are indefensible. Brian specifically mentioned places like Memphis and Nashville being split apart into multiple congressional districts. That happened for a reason. Republicans understand that if large urban populations, especially black voters, remain politically unified, Democrats become far more competitive statewide. So the strategy is to fracture those populations across multiple Republican-heavy districts to dilute their influence. That's exactly why Brian used the phrase Jim Crow 2.0, and conservatives hate hearing that phrase because it forces them to confront the racial and historical implications of these policies. Gerrymandering in the South has never been race neutral. Pretending otherwise is dishonest. And what's especially revealing is that Caroline even admitted at one point that gerrymandering is terrible for democracy. She literally acknowledged it, but then immediately defaulted back into defending Republican-controlled states doing it because states' rights. That's the contradiction at the center of modern conservatism. Republicans simultaneously argue that gerrymandering is bad while aggressively using it to entrench minority rule wherever possible. If they genuinely believed it was wrong, they would support the exact same national ban Democrats proposed in the Freedom to Vote Act. But as Brian pointed out, every single Republican voted against it. Everyone. That's the key detail here. Republicans love complaining about unfair maps in California while refusing to support nationwide reform because they benefit too much from the current system. They don't actually want fairness. They want asymmetric advantage. And honestly, that asymmetry defines almost every major issue in American politics right now. Look at the broader pattern. Republicans spent years screaming about activist courts, then celebrated when conservative judges overturned Roe v. Wade despite decades of precedent. They claimed to support local democracy, then supported overturning ballot initiatives voters approved on abortion, marijuana legalization, Medicaid expansion, and legal rights. They scream about government overreach while supporting authoritarian crackdowns on protests, education, and voting access. The ideology changes depending on who holds power.
And Brian was also absolutely correct when he said the Supreme Court increasingly operates as an arm of the Republican Party. Conservatives get offended when people say that, but look at the outcomes. Voting Rights Act protections weakened, Roe overturned, corporate power expanded, Republican-friendly interpretations of election law repeatedly upheld. Meanwhile, when Democratic-aligned policies are involved, suddenly the court becomes obsessed with procedural technicalities and constitutional limitations. Americans are not blind. They can see the ideological pattern emerging from these rulings. Then the conversation shifted into the Spencer Pratt discussion. And honestly, that segment may have been the most depressing part of the entire clip because it captured how unserious American politics has become in the Trump era. Caroline Sunshine literally described Spencer Pratt, a reality television personality, as a viable political candidate because he has outsider energy and knows how to harness attention. Think about how insane that is. The qualifications being discussed are not experience, competence, policy knowledge, administrative ability, or leadership skills. It's celebrity, controversy, and viral attention. That's what Donald Trump normalized. And Tyler Cohen nailed it when he sarcastically asked what could possibly go wrong with putting another reality TV personality in charge. We already know the answer because we lived through it. Trump filled his administration with grifters, conspiracy theorists, loyalists, and wildly unqualified media personalities whose primary qualification was personal loyalty to him. The result was chaos, corruption, incompetence, and institutional damage on a historical scale. Look at some of the names Brian mentioned. RFK Jr. pushing dangerous anti-science rhetoric, Kash Patel being elevated despite his extremism, Dan Bongino-style media personalities becoming influential political figures simply because they know how to rage online. Modern Republican politics increasingly resembles influencer culture more than governance. Expertise is viewed as suspicious, seriousness is viewed as elitism, ignorance becomes authenticity, and Caroline Sunshine actually framed that as a positive thing.
That's the truly alarming part, because governing a city like Los Angeles or a country of over 330 million people is not a reality show. It's not content creation. It's not podcast culture. Real people's healthcare, jobs, housing, education, infrastructure, emergency response systems, and civil rights are affected by these decisions. When unqualified narcissists get placed into positions of enormous authority simply because they are famous or entertaining, the damage is real. Trump's presidency should have permanently discredited the idea that celebrity and charisma are substitutes for competence. Instead, a huge portion of the Republican movement looked at the chaos of the last decade and concluded the problem was that Trump simply didn't go far enough. And that's why Brian's larger point matters so much. Democrats cannot keep pretending the political environment is normal when one party increasingly treats democratic institutions as obstacles to overcome rather than systems to preserve. Whether it's gerrymandering, court capture, election denialism, or elevating unqualified celebrity candidates, the modern Republican strategy revolves around consolidating power by any means available while reframing every criticism as partisan hysteria. The scary part is that a lot of Americans are becoming numb to it. The constant chaos starts to feel ordinary. A reality TV star running for mayor, a president openly demanding states redraw maps in his favor, courts overturning voter-backed initiatives, conspiracy-driven media figures shaping national policy discussions.
10 years ago, much of this would have sounded absurd. Now, it barely shocks people anymore. But Brian Tyler Cohen was right to push back hard against it, because normalization is exactly how democratic erosion accelerates. Once the public accepts corruption, incompetence, and authoritarian behavior as just another feature of politics, accountability starts collapsing. And when accountability collapses, the people hurt most are ordinary Americans, not wealthy political insiders who can insulate themselves from the consequences. That's why these debates matter. Not because CNN panels themselves change policy, but because they expose the underlying worldview shaping American politics right now. One side is at least attempting to defend voting rights, democratic representation, and institutional legitimacy. The other increasingly views politics as entertainment, domination, and power acquisition. And that difference could not have been clearer in this exchange.